What's past is prologue, what to come in yours and my discharge. These words, first spoken by William Shakespeare in The Tempest, frame the first words of the prologue of a new book about our nation's future by Robert Putnam called The Upswing. Shakespeare's words alone would form a worthy beginning for a High Holy Day sermon, since forgiveness and repentance are the prime themes of The Tempest. What Shakespeare means by these words is that everything up until this moment has merely set the stage for us to write our own destinies. What Putnam means by beginning his book with these momentous words is that we stand today as a nation on the precipice of a new and better age, if only we as a nation can reach out and embrace that destiny. The Upswing is the masterwork of a lifetime of research in demography and American life by Harvard professor and best-selling author Robert Putnam. In it, Putnam and his partner in research, Shaylin Romney Garrett, plot the course of an American life over the past 125 years, from the Gilded Age of the 1890s until today. And what they found is that along the lines of economics and politics and society and culture, America's traveled along an inverted U-shaped curve from I to we to I, in an inexorable path from the radical age of individual freedom and selfish concern for individual needs towards a greater commitment to communal values and the responsibilities of citizenship. And then we travel back again. And the upshot of the Upswing is that these same inexorable forces which have brought us to this day stand poised to propel us into a new, more community-oriented age for the future. The Gilded Age marks the tumultuous years between the Civil War and the turn of the 20th century. Mark Twain, the great writer and political commentator of that age, gave those years their name in a novel called The Gilded Age. In it, he described an America more prosperous than ever before, with unprecedented growth in industry and technology, but at the same time, an era of serious social problems, masked by the thin gold gilding of economic expansion. A time of vast income inequality, racial strife, religious intolerance, political gridlock. An unregulated age where huge corporations wielded vast control over the lives and livelihoods of small business and individual Americans. Immigrants were clamoring at our doors to fill the jobs of this rapidly expanding economy. Many of our ancestors were those immigrants. And yet a growing concern over the changes these immigrants might bring to American life and the changes brought on by the industrialization itself began to eat away at our sense of common cause and the very value which had made our nation great. It was a time when Americans were increasingly concerned about their own rights, their own prosperity, and held little regard for the responsibility of citizenship, or our common future together as a nation. By the time Putnam is done with his description of the Gilded Age, those years sound frighteningly familiar, like a fractured mirror image of our America of today. And then, sometime around the turn of that century, America began to change, ushering a great revival in virtually all aspects of American life. Over the course of the next 60 years, a period punctuated by a global pandemic and 2 world wars, America found her way back to the values of community and shared responsibility. We increasingly became a land of political compromise and growingly recognized the inequities in society which we had long needed to address. Income inequality was cut in half through the efforts of government trust busting, progressive income taxes, and the growth of unions which strengthened the hands of workers in this new industrial age. Education rates, which opened the door to economic prosperity, began to skyrocket due to local efforts to increase high school graduation, and the GI Bill, which afforded college education to an entire generation who had served our country and now come home. Public health initiatives after the devastating flu epidemic of 1917, and a national charitable campaign to eradicate polio helped drive infant and child mortality rates into steep decline, while life expectancies began a meteoric rise. The contentious politics which had made cooperation and compromise between bitter rivals all but impossible gave way to increasingly bipartisan legislation in Washington, with Congress working together regularly and restoring faith in government along the way. The national press was filled with articles about Democrats and Republicans working together for the common good, and local elections increasingly emphasized the quality of candidates and their local concerns, and previously unheard of split-ticket voting for Congress and the president soon became a common feature of American politics. America became again a nation of joiners, with a record number of new national organizations being formed for the sake of society and the common good. Civic involvement and volunteer life blossomed to unheard-of levels, with religious affiliation and involvement in churches and synagogues leading the way. Americans of all classes and cultures were attending meetings, attending services. Even Jews were coming to temple on a regular basis. And charitable giving expanded across wide levels of income. The books we read, the concerts we attended, the magazines we published, the sermons we preached were increasingly filled with the values of community and the virtues of the common man, the importance of responsibilities over rights, and the shared values and common destinies that make our nation one. All these unfolding trends towards common cause and common values are laid out in quantifiable numbers, graphs, and charts with remarkable insight. The radical individualism of the Gilded Age faded from our national mindset, giving way to a more balanced value of rights and responsibilities, and an ever-expanding vision of liberty and justice for all. But then, sometime in the 1960s, the tide began to change. John F. Kennedy's famous challenge, "Ask not what your country can do for you, ask what you can do for your country," may have sounded at the time like a clarion call to place shared interest above self-interest. But from the perspective of history, we can now see that this era of cooperation was already coming to a close. The tumultuous times of the late 60s and 70s fractured the aura of shared responsibility and common destiny, and slowly at first, but steadily, we began a long descent along those same four lines of economy, politics, society, and culture, away from the we-oriented society which together we had built. Reversing the community-minded trends of the previous 6 decades, we returned toward that I-oriented America, descending into what Putnam calls our second Gilded Age. We became again a hyper-partisan society where fabulous wealth abides amidst abject poverty, engaged in seemingly endless culture wars, and steadily declining civic involvement in our increasingly secular America. An America where individual rights have become enshrined even to the clearest detriment of the common good. An America where bipartisan cooperation is a dirty word. And even in the face of a global pandemic, the foundations of public health have become a pawn in the game of politics and culture, where individual rights are cherished above our very lives and the critical needs of our common good. Other historians have identified what they called pendulum swings in certain aspects of American life. What's new in the upswing is the scope and the depth of this study. It's not just that economic, political, social, and cultural trends swing back and forth over time. It's that all these forces have been moving along parallel curves for the past 125 years in American history. And unlike the actual pendulum, which naturally is affected by forces like gravity, drawing it to swing back and forth over time, these shifts of value could in theory go on forever in either direction. America could continue to become ever more self-centered until we tore this nation apart. Or we could move continually towards a more community-minded society until we became some sort of communist state. And yet, we don't. There seems to be a natural point of return. And according to Putnam, we have reached that moment, here and now. Robert Putnam is a social scientist. He's not a biblical prophet of old like Isaiah or Jeremiah or Jonah, whose immortal words we read on these high holy days. He can't foretell the future, but then again, neither could they. The prophets of the Bible did not predict the future, because as Jews we believe in our ability and responsibility to choose that path for ourselves. Rather, they plotted for us the course of our journey, how the choices we've made have brought us to this day, and showed us the future that journey would hold, challenging us to choose a better future, to set our sights towards a greater destiny of blessing for us and our posterity, and for our people as a whole. Robert Putnam's Jewish too, and this is exactly what his social scientific prophecy is calling us to do, to embrace our destiny by turning our backs on our own gilded age, to become once again one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Will it happen? We shall see. In biblical times, when they wondered how to tell the difference between a false prophet and one who spoke the truth, they applied a simple rule: wait and see. If a prophet spoke the words that came to pass, they were a true prophet. If their words did not come to pass, well, then they were a false prophet. If we were to apply such a standard to Putnam's prophecy, we would call him a true prophet in record time. But the problem for prophets, then and now, is that our destiny only becomes our own when we choose to embrace it. The Upswing was published less than a year ago, but there are indications that the turn from I to we has already begun. Just 1 month after the book was released, America elected Joe Biden, the first moderate candidate to be elected to the White House in decades. Recognizing the extremely partisan nature of the Capitol riot, which sought to overturn Biden's election, the condemnation of this insurrection by more than 80% of Americans across all lines of party affiliation, income, society, and culture represents an unprecedented level of agreement that our commitment to the Constitution and the rule of law matters more than our individual interests or desires. Similarly, while the ongoing debate over masks and vaccines in response to the global pandemic may shine a bright light on our nation's partisan, religious, and cultural divides, the now nearly 80% of Americans who support these scientifically proven means of combating the disease represents a consensus of support for our common responsibility over extreme expressions of personal freedom. And with that, the painful loss of 650,000 of our fellow citizens has taught us a stark and painful lesson on the truly interconnectedness and the nature of all of our lives. And for all the political bickering on constant display in the national press and amplified beyond means online by social media, we have, against all odds, witnessed the passage of a $1 trillion infrastructure bill, the first major bipartisan legislation to clear both houses of Congress in recent memory. Is this the beginning of the great upswing which will carry us forward in the decades to come? We will see. America is not a pendulum. There are no forces of gravity which will inevitably pull us from one extreme towards the other. There's only us and our ability to see the path ahead and to choose a better future for ourselves and our posterity. What can we do? In the last chapter of his book, Putnam lists a number of paths towards a better future, but they all begin here with us. A central component of this new upswing must include the kind of religious revival or great awakening which arose out of the last Gilded Age. In Putnam's words, religious institutions have long been the single most important source of community connectedness and social solidarity in America. And so, we must begin again with a greater commitment to this place, our faith, and the work we do together for the community beyond these walls. There will be challenges to overcome, particularly in the continued distance from this place and from each other due to the resurgence of the pandemic in these days. It will require greater creativity, flexibility, and determination in making a holy congregation which reaches out beyond these walls. And yet, I have faith in our future. Our greater involvement at a distance will soon give way to greater opportunities to work together in the building of a better world, sustaining that eternal call to be a just and righteous people, building a just and righteous society for all of us to share. We have learned some lessons on the value of community in our lives through these times of peril. Now let us plot for ourselves a new path for our journey, setting our sights towards a greater destiny of blessing for us and our prosperity, for our community as a whole. What's past is prologue. What to come in yours and my discharge. The history of our congregation spans this century-long story of rise and fall and well beyond, now nearly 180 years, as a beacon of faith and of learning and commitment to community that we share. It is up to us, L'Dor Vador, from generation to generation. Let us keep this holy place strong.